Hello and welcome back to the Author Roundup, a special segment of the Book Connection Show where we meet up and coming indie authors and talk to them about the recently released books. Welcome back again. This is Ray Walters. Imagine a world where sameness is safety, obedience is virtue, and even having a personal preference can mark you as a threat. In Inferior, readers are taken into a dystopian city where citizens are trained to erase difference, hide their faces, surrender their individuality, and serve the collective under the watch of central authority. But when one citizen begins to feel the pull of preference, curiosity, and selfhood, his careful, controlled life begins to fracture. What waits beyond the city is not simple paradise. It is freedom with hunger, danger, beauty, friendship, jealousy, and the terrifying burden of becoming someone. This is a story about escaping control, but it is also about what a person brings with him when he escapes. It asks whether freedom alone can make someone whole or whether the deeper battle is inside the human heart. Today, we'll be talking about Inferior with its author, Robert Webb. Robert, welcome to the Author Roundup.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Congratulations on getting this book published, Robert.
Well, that's just the first step. Now it's actually making people aware of it so that they'll read it too.
It's a very interesting book, and I can't wait to ask you the first question that I have. Um, I want to ask you this because this gives you a chance to introduce the world, the interesting world, the main character, and the central conflict in your own words without giving away too much too early. So, for viewers and listeners who are tuned in, who are new to Inferior, how would you describe the story at the center of the book?
The best way that I would describe it is that I like to think that Inferior is a worthy entry to the dystopian genre in the same proud tradition as Orwell, Huxley, etc. It is, but where most dystopias tend to focus on the oppression of whatever society or system that the people live under. I wanted to sort of explore that what is I think is the source of the darkness that leads to oppressive systems, and that is human failing. And so I feel Inferior is more personal and more introspective, if I may be so bold.
Okay. The story, your book begins in a society where differences are treated as dangerous. What drew you to a world where conformity is not just encouraged but enforced?
Well, it's kind of an obvious trick, really. If you're creating a system of control, it makes sense to basically reduce everything down to a few simple things that you can
Yeah.
account for. Variability is the enemy of predictability, and predictability is the essence of control. But I guess like a direct inspiration is like, well, I was reading another classic dystopian Anthem by Ayn Rand, and it's a similar thing where but the story ends with the protagonist escaping in the dystopian society that he lives in, although it's a very primitive one, deliberately so. And I just decided, well, what would happen after that? Because, it's not just you flee off into the woods and you're just going to rebuild society and it's all going to be sunshine and unicorns.
Right. I'm actually in the dystopian world, there's always something apocalyptic. Something happened before that destroyed the society that was, and then this new society rose up, and a lot of things change. Maybe it could be a result of anarchy, and that's the interesting side, and that's what makes it interesting for me. Like, how does society stand now, right after something cataclysmic, something apocalyptic, and I don't know. I mean, we have viewers and listeners right now who are also into that, and it makes you imagine, makes you think, it makes you wonder, it makes your mind fly.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're familiar with the early 2000s film Equilibrium, the whole premise is that everyone is made to suppress their emotions because emotion is blamed for a cataclysm that happened before the story
Yeah.
started. And I guess in a way, though I never drew a direct connection to Equilibrium when writing Inferior, you could say that it's a similar sort of thing. Only the dystopian precursors decide, well, the pre-dystopian people who created the city decided that difference and awareness of difference is the root cause, and therefore the masks, the clothes, the voice modulators, everything to make every single person look identical, so there is no difference, and thus they think no reason for conflict, instability, anything else that might
Yeah,
cause this, the clockwork of the
true.
society to fall apart.
True. Let's look at Citizen 625 726's first major act of inner rebellion. It's not violent or dramatic. It begins with a preference for one kind of work. Why did you make something so ordinary feel so threatening in this world?
I'm not sure if threatening is the right word, but
Yeah.
certainly it is. It's a uncounted for or factor. Or the idea of in the society is that again, for the sake of avoiding preference, you're swapped out of whatever profession you're given every 6 months or so. And I guess I wanted something very simple, something that to you or I or anyone living in a sane world would seem this is just why would this be a big song and dance over? Why would he be given the choice of either execution and for going for having a sentiments that go against the city's laws, or basically be medicated and, to the point where he's basically just going to be living in a daze for whatever time is left for him. But again, the thing about a lot of dystopias, especially the classic kind, is it's all about control. And anything that might cause a person to act outside of the city's control, that is in itself a threat. And central authority, it's not like the computer sees uh, him as a threat. It's following the programming that its creators put into it. It's a machine. Machines don't really feel emotions. It's
Yeah.
certainly not going to feel threatened, but it's like, no, these are the protocols. And I am given the authority to basically make sure that every person in the city follows them. Anyone
Follows
who
it.
doesn't follow them, they are a breaker of peace and they are euthanized.
Yeah, and they're people who doesn't follow these protocols make the machine think that you're starting something complex, and something complex destroys the balance.
Yes, because that's the motive. Because again, machines are, I guess,
True,
any kind of
true.
AI, and we're finding that out now in a way. AIs are ultimately a reflection of their creators, and the creators of central authority basically thought, well, again, just like how the leaders of Libra in Equilibrium sort of overreact to emotion as the threat, the precursors overreact to the awareness of difference as a threat. And so again,
Okay.
the central authority is just rigidly programmed to say, well, any deviation from from protocol is an aberration to be dealt with.
Yeah. Let's talk about the main character. So the main character here leaves the city, and he has to encounter very basic things: his own face, hunger, nature, danger, and choice. Um, I don't know. Why was it important to make freedom feel physical before it became philosophical?
Well, because most people don't consciously think about these things. We experience the world first and then we think about it. And so I think it just makes obvious sense that, after he has the accident that causes him to be, essentially flushed out of the city,
Mm,
he experiences the outside world in terms of just the fact that he's cold, he's wet, he's hungry, he's in completely unfamiliar territory beyond anything of his limited experience. And it's only after he is able to get past that and reconcile himself to it can he even begin to think about you know what is my existence now, and even the very concept of my or I individuality at all. It's like, it was only after our ancestors solved the Stone Age problems of survival that we were able to devote time to thinking about, well, why are we here and what does I even mean?
Yeah. Paradise becomes a guide for the main character, but he is not simply a perfect rescuer. What role did you want Paradise to play in the story?
I suppose initially he was obviously going to be sort of the mentor figure because
Mm,
he'd been out in the world longer, he was more familiar with it, and of course he would introduce Unbroken, because that's the name that he takes for himself
yeah.
afterwards, to sort of these higher ideas, which ironically he is found not in any textbooks of philosophy, because all of those had degraded by the time Paradise even found that little bunker in the mountains, but through a few scrappy fiction books that managed to survive whatever society existed before. I didn't really think. Then, of course, as time goes by, though, he becomes sort of the focus of a one-sided rivalry because he is completely oblivious to the fact that Unbroken comes to increasingly not so much resentment comes later, but he's sort of like he's not exactly keen on the fact that Paradise just seems to be the natural leader, because when more members join their community, they just almost naturally follow him. And so,
Yeah.
why is that? Why him and not me?
That's a very interesting angle. A kind of like perspective I had when I was like going through that part of the book. Now, books play a major role in awakening the main character's imagination and sense of self. Why do you make old stories such an important part of this transformation?
Thinking back on it, it's kind of hard to say, except that maybe I didn't want it to be something obvious. Like, for
Mm,
example, I could have written it so that there was like a copy of Rene Descartes that had survived in the bunker. But I think stories are important in the sense of they help us give us a frame of reference for the world without being obvious about it. Good fiction imparts values and lessons without it making it seem like a lesson.
okay, that makes sense.
It's not a perfect explanation because I wasn't really thinking that consciously of it when I was writing it.
All right. Okay. Now let's go back to the name that Paradise chose, Unbroken. Uh, the name Unbroken carries a lot of meaning. What does that name reveal about how the character sees himself? And, you know, like what the character sees himself and what might it hide also.
Well, obviously, I'm not allowed to spoil anything, but there's a bit of irony in the name later on, but certainly he sees it as, well, by claiming my individuality and by choosing a name, I have now asserted and created a sense of self, and that
Okay.
this will, and like compared to the dull conformity of the city, this is so much better. There is I feel an exultation and happiness that I never could have known as merely citizen so and so. I didn't have a name, I had a barcode. And so when he chooses this name, it's the idea that this will be the rock upon which my sense of self is born, and it will be unshakable.
Okay. All right. Um,
Having claimed freedom, I will not give this up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Many dystopian stories focus mainly on the system, but what I noticed with your book, Inferior, it also examines what happens inside the people who escape it. Why was that um, inner struggle important to you?
Because systems are ultimately comprised of people. They don't exist independent of human interaction. And so, if corruption or darkness is to take hold in any kind of order, it has to first begin with people, with their moral failings or lackings or whatever.
Mhm.
There's a reason why in a way, we still, even like all these centuries later, even though we live in a mostly democratic or republican society, we still have the image of King Arthur as sort of the ideal leader because
Yeah.
he is virtuous. And because he is virtuous, he is able to rule well. And of course, we have the case of, I don't know if it's how new or old this idea is, but it's called the evil king fallacy because we assume that all the problems in the world can be embodied in a single figure, and that if we take that down and find something good to replace it, all will be well.
Yeah, I'll be solved.
Except we fail to consider that, well, there may be unusually evil people in the world, there may be unusually good people in the world, but they are very hard to come by. And how would you even find them?
Now let's shine the spotlight on the outside community, outside the control of central authority. As the outside community grows, freedom brings friendship and possibility, but also comparison. You have jealousy, and then you have conflict. What did you want to explore about the difficulty of living freely with other people?
Well, I guess the best way to sum it up without giving too much away is that, in a sense, the creators of central authority and the city were technically correct. It's just that, sure, their solution to the problem is certainly unacceptable to any sane person, but certainly, yes, when we become aware of differences from one another, and especially if we come out as not as good as the other guy, that does
Uh-huh.
lead to
Uh-huh.
resentment, that does lead to
Uh-huh.
the kind of friction that could result in conflict. So it's, again, I guess it sort of goes back to an old problem. You look at every philosopher, every thinker who thinks, well, I have figured out the world's problems and I'm going to solve it. Identifying the problem is always the easy part, and all too often the solutions that people propose are, horrifically off the mark. We only have to look at the 20th century for proof of that. um, and so really, in a way, yeah, freedom is not free, sort of a contradiction,
It's
but
not
that's,
absolute.
and certainly, living in a society where you're not forced to all be alike, you are going to be aware of the fact that some people are different, some people look different, some people have certain skill sets that others don't have, and vice versa.
The title Inferior is direct and unsettling. When did you know that this was the right title, and what does inferiority mean within the story?
I don't know exactly when I knew that this was going to be it, but I certainly have a very fixed idea from the start. It's a known fact that, there are losers and winners in life. And
Yes.
there are some people who are able to accept both victory or defeat with, good grace. They don't immediately react with just resentment and want to take it out on someone else who may or may, regardless of whether or not they even are responsible, because there's this thing called the victim perception fallacy. And there have even been psychological studies that um, people have a very hard time determining whether or not they've been treated fairly when they don't get what they want. And I guess the idea of the awareness, that's sort of, I guess, where the name came from, and why I knew because, I wanted it to be very blunt and direct, that this is what this is about. This is about someone who is, in many ways, if Inferior were written differently, Paradise would be the main character. He very much has all of the qualities of a stereotypical heroic protagonist type.
Yeah.
But Inferior is not that. But Unbroken is not that person, and he's sort of one of the. He's in this alternate version. He would be kind of one of the sidekicks. And everybody has a bit of main character syndrome in them,
Yeah.
as it's called.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Robert. I'm down to my last two questions. Um, the book challenges the idea that leaving a bad system automatically makes a person good, wise, or whole. What do you hope readers wrestle with as they watch the main character change?
First, I hope they come to appreciate the fact that all things, even the very best things in life, come at a price. The I guess the second thing I would like them to take away from Inferior, if anything, is that yeah, the world isn't fair, but that doesn't give you the right to stew in your own resentments. And there is one, it's kind of pointless, and two, in acting out these resentments, you can cause, in many ways, great harm, maybe even irreparable harm.
Robert, please tell us where we can grab a copy of your book. I know we have viewers and listeners right now who are interested, so where can they get a copy of it?
Well, besides the Archway Publishing site itself, I do have a website, right? Studio Brainstorm, but I have to make some alterations to it so that people can just pay with their card and not have to go through a secondary thing like PayPal.
That's great. We're going to make that link available on the description box on both our YouTube page of this episode and on our podcast as well. Now, Robert, by the end, Inferior raises a difficult question about freedom, envy, weakness, and responsibility. What uncomfortable question do you hope readers ask themselves after finishing the book?
Do I really believe in freedom? Because again, without spoiling, there because Inferior has a very dark ending, and that's because it's a personal belief of mine. Not everyone shares it, and it's
Yeah.
understandable. But I feel that a dystopian story is not really dystopian unless it is a cautionary tale, and therefore has to have a downer ending. Otherwise, you're just telling a story that's in a dystopian setting. That's a personal view of mine on that matter. But yeah, I think I can't remember off the top of my head, but there is a great Aldous Huxley quote where he says the great, essentially something to the effect that the great mass of people don't really want freedom; they just want comfort with the illusion of
Of
freedom. So
freedom.
long as they don't feel that the authorities, the powers that be, impose on them too much, they will accept their servitude.
Robert, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today and, getting to talk through the world and ideas behind your book, Inferior.
Thank you. It was fun to talk about.
I really did enjoy it. I also want to give a big shout out to our awesome viewers and listeners for joining us for this interview. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations on the Author Roundup. I'm Ray Walters. Join me next time as we explore the world of supported self publishing, one indie author at a time.